it has become apparent to the petitioner that the petition that is submitted to Shraj is not going to wash. Hence, he's finding other means to, as it were, create a certain impression and words he uses to the effect of state capture and all sorts of jargoneering. You see, the Anani case that he read was a specific allegation regarding Dr. Anani and an American lady and the relationship that they've had, pursuant to which he had used his office to award some contract to the lady. Right? That sat, if you like, on all fours with the provisions of the Constitution. Is that what is happening now? Has Mr. Brian Achampon used this office as a minister to award any contract to any third party that is involved in, for which you can accuse him of conflict of interest? In any event, you see, I always say we overstretch the concept of conflict of interest in this country. We do? Absolutely. Or that we rather, because you see, the opposite. We don't actually appear to appreciate it much. Maybe the lack of appreciation is what elsewhere they look at the actual, the potential, the apparent, and the potential. I don't have any difficulty at all. Okay. We can look at all the levels. That still does not prohibit a public official in participating in a public transaction. To the extent that he makes appropriate disclosures and removes himself completely from the decision-making, such that he doesn't influence it in any way. But what do we hear? That a minister for Agric and a member of parliament for Abetifi owns a company publicly known. SSNIT's board takes a decision to divest its interest in hotels, publishes an international competitive tender. The hotel or the company then submits to participate in the tender. Then all of a sudden, the minister's personality is what becomes the issue for conversation. And I hear people talk of don't sell profitable hotels and all sorts of things. I'm sure you've seen the same documentation relating to the profitability and otherwise and the return that they are getting from these investments that they've had for in excess of 15 years. Yesterday, I had the benefit of being on Metro TV and I asked the host whether if he had money, he would put his money in banks that were returning 1.5% for his investment, that do not pay dividends for years. And I go to the point about previous decisions that SSNIT had made. I'm not saying that it was wrong or right. I'm saying that consistently over the years, SSNIT's board makes determinations as regards its investment appetite and what investment was given it return for the funds that they were managing. And so in 2011, it took a decision to initially put together Trust Bank, First Atlantic with EcoBank. At the time, I was working at First Atlantic Merchant Bank. We hadn't met the minimum capital requirements at the time. Trust Bank had met it. EcoBank, obviously, because it's a big boy, had sufficient enough capital. But SSNIT took a decision that wanted to merge all the three. The only reason why First Atlantic was not part of that measure was because the chief executive at the time, Mr. Judata, had made a representation to the board of First Atlantic with SSNIT representatives, in fact, shareholders of First Atlantic, that look, he does not object to First Atlantic participating in any measure. However, capitalize the bank so that the bank can go into those measure discussions on an equal footing with TTB and EcoBank. Samson, we had started the capitalization quest as far back as 2009. SSNIT, the largest shareholder at the time, was never interested in putting any money in First Atlantic Bank anymore. But because of that representation, the next day they submitted a check to pay for additional equity in First Atlantic to enable them dispose of it to EcoBank. Coincidentally, we had engaged EM Capital, headed by Mr. Michael Shawn, to help us capitalize the bank. And they had submitted some investment proposal from Kedari nominees from Nigeria. That shareholders meeting, when they approved the acquisition of shares by SSNIT, which would have taken them to 90% holding in the bank, also approved the Kedari transaction. And so, post that approval of those two investments, SSNIT's stake reduced to less than 50%, such that they could not force the merger between First Atlantic, TTB, and EcoBank. That's why they went ahead to do the merger with only EcoBank and Trust Bank. And subsequently used the Bank of Ghana to hoodwink Kedari to buy SSNIT out as part of the approval process, because significant shareholding, you need Bank of Ghana approval before your shareholding can be accepted. But it was an investment decision that SSNIT had taken at the time, that they were no longer interested in investing in banks because it was not returning sufficient enough return, according to them, to the fund. Subsequently, in 2013, they did the same thing to Merchant Bank, where they sold SSNIT's majority stake in Merchant Bank to Fortis. In 2020, 2022, 2023, they decide that, look, these hotels that we have significant investments in, per the document that they've issued, is not generating sufficient enough return to the fund. And so they were disposing of their interest, or at least a significant part of it, to a strategic investor, so that SSNIT can reduce its risk in those hotels. They go through a public tender, and all of a sudden that becomes an issue. How consistent are we? In any event, Samson, I'm sure you contribute to the SSNIT pension fund.
Of course.
I do as well. Samokuje told us, is it prudent for the contributions that we make to be invested in banks that are not paying any dividends to our fund? And at the very least, if they were making a return of 1.5%, you will support the board of SSNIT to keep holding that investment and keep putting money in it? I certainly will not.
The suggestion is you don't have to sell. You don't have to divest your interest.
So what do you do?
What you do, change course,
change
management.
Haven't they in the past and yielded no result?
So something is certainly wrong.
Absolutely. But what are they doing?
If a private investor can see the profits in the entity that is going downhill, then there's something good in there.
I agree. I happen to work in the public service now, coming from a private sector background. The attitude is completely different. And so what has the board decided to do? Are they disposing of all the SSNIT's interest in the hotels? Are they? They are shedding off 60% to reduce their exposure. Because for 15 years, and bring a private sector player who will bring that kind of private sector attitude to ensure that they generate the requisite return for you and I, the fund owners. It becomes an issue.
What does 60%?
The only issue,
60% for the private investor render you in the scheme of things?
It gives you a return if they make profit. And the private investor, because they are minded to ensure that the investment generates the requisite profit that we are not getting in the public space. And that is what has informed all the state-owned assets that have been disposed of during the tenure of previous governments, including the NDC, primarily. But it's Brenda Champon. So all hell must break loose.
But this is not new, though. In 2013, you remember, You know, and they are winning.
So let's admit, I agree.
And their winning was in the presidency, working for
not a problem at all.
When Merchant Bank came up, you know, for sale, and their winning was against it, he went into the courts. Yeah.
So it goes back to the issue that this is nothing but politics. Pure and simple. It has nothing to do with the interest of SSNIT or the pension fund holders. It has nothing to do with anything but the personality of Brian Acheampong, who is acquiring that asset, who happens to be an MPP member, who hasn't breached any law, either constitutional or otherwise. That is the only basis for all this noise.
He hasn't breached any law.
What law has he breached?
The provisions of the Constitution.
Show me. Show me.
He needs a certificate of the Speaker.
Very good.
To do a job for emoluments.
You see?
And we understand he doesn't have a certificate.
Says who? I don't have a problem. Where's the recourse? Oh, I'm coming. Where is the recourse to charge? Read chapter 24, article 287. An allegation that the public officer has contravened or has not complied with the provision of this chapter. It's only a 3-page chapter, chapter 24. The article 98 that he makes reference to. You can only go to the Speaker to lodge a complaint.
I've talked about 284. I went to Shraj because of 284. 287 is the forum, which is Shraj.
Wait.
Yes.
284 says, a public officer shall not put himself in a position where his personal interest. Has Brian Acheampong put himself in any position relative to this transaction that his personal interest is conflicting with the performance of his public office? Is he a Minister for Finance? Is he the board? Is he on the board of SSNIT?
He's not at cabinet.
Thank you very much. Is it a cabinet decision? Have you seen any cabinet memo relative to this transaction that SSNIT board has submitted this transaction to cabinet for approval and Brian Acheampong participated in the decision?
You're not sure?
Have you seen it? You see? Look, Samson, I'm coming. Oh, please. You see? So he says it's going to charge under Article 284.
And 287.
And I'm saying that 284 can only be relevant in that other case that you read, where Brian Acheampong, in this case, if he was contracting as minister with a third-party company that he had an interest in, then you could properly found an allegation of conflict of interest against him. That is what the procedure that is spelled out in 287 says. That when anybody breaches a provision of this chapter 24, go to charge. But I'm saying that because you yourself realize that Brian has not breached any 284 provision, strictly so-called, you are bringing in 98. And I'm saying that 98, if you say, and I'm not in a position to verify, he's breached it, your recourse is not to charge. And so you go and gather people and go and do demonstration and play NDC songs. So it's pure politicking. And use the tag that suits them. State capture. Where is the state capture in this? Then I go back to ask, when you were selling those entities in the past, was it state capture? He says he started his activism in 2008, but it went underwater between 2009 and 2016 when he was in government, when all these transactions were taking place. If you had the interest of the pension holders at heart, why did you not object to the sale of these assets to whoever? Because from what I hear, if he says that it's not personalizing the issue because it's Brian Acheampong who is involved, then the principle is that all these assets ought not be sold, whether they are making profit or not. But is that even a legitimate basis to proceed?
The OECD's guidelines on questions of conflict of interest, which assists many nations to do what they have to do, and which I suppose also influences the code of conduct for public officers done by the Shraj in 2006, defines conflict of interest as, it says, a conflict of interest involves a conflict between the public duty and private interests of a public official.
Yes.
In which the public official has private capacity interests which could improperly influence the performance of their official duties and responsibilities.
Yes.
There's the potential of the prospective, if it's not now, if it's not actual. You don't see that here. That
You tell me. Maybe I'm blinded.
okay.
And so use the provisions that you've outlined eloquently and relate it to Brian Champon, specific, relative to this transaction, and tell us. I'm happy to concede. But I've read the provisions. I've read the Constitution. I've looked at the transaction, the facts, as put out there. It has no connection whatsoever to the performance of his personal duty, his public duty, to even ground an allegation of conflict of interest on his part.
If you ask my view, I'll say my view of conflict of interest, the way I translate it, I see it as a principle that is actually enunciated in the scriptures, in the Bible, where it says, abstain from all appearances of evil.
I agree.
All appearances.
Not a problem at all.
Just the appearance of it.
Not a problem.
Because that is actually conflict of interest.
So what appearance of evil do you see in this transaction, that public, that the facts as we know it?
So for the public, the members who went...
I'm not talking of the public.
No. For the public, the members who went on the street, the chief in, is it Edina, who spoke against this long before, and also this Wulomo who joined, those people, it appears to me their thinking is that once you are in government, you are an MP, you are a minister, and you have a company which you are the sole owner, you should not be participating in the purchase of a state property for, and some agree, some say, for a price less than what something could have actually been the price. And that your job is to protect the public interest. So if you sit in cabinet and there's something going wrong with SSNIT and how it is investing for pensioners and for all of us, your approach should not be to buy what they are doing. Rather, see how you can use that to get the profit for the public, rather than seeking to get a profit for yourself.
You see, they could be right. But is that the law? It could be. And yesterday, I happened to be on a program with Sami Okudzeto. He says he's promoting a private members bill. Because obviously, in his own view, the law as presently constituted does not address the peculiar situation that we seem to find ourselves in.
Yeah, that's a clear admission. But
I don't
must
have
we
a
reduce everything to law and leave out
why,
morality?
I don't have what's the issue of morality? And by whose standard? In any event, the bastardization of the individual involved, as if he's committed some crime, that he is using his office to capture some asset of the state. Is that factual?
Okay.